In the early 2000s, Israel constructed a highly contentious 440-mile barrier wall that runs through Bethlehem, cutting the West Bank off from Israel. I visited the separation wall and saw with my own eyes how it cut indigenous Palestinians off from their own lands, causing immense financial hardship and personal suffering. Approximately 85% of the wall doesn't run between the territories of Israel and the West Bank. It actually cuts deep into the West Bank, as much as 11 miles into Palestinian territory, giving the land on the other side to Israel. It separates over 25,000 Palestinian residents from the rest of Palestinian territory. I spoke with local business owners and heard how this apartheid wall put many locals out of business and severely diminished the income of so many others. Since its creation, the wall has been the subject of intense debate and criticism by prominent human rights groups, and it's easy to see from up-close viewing how it violates Palestinian rights of movement and access to Palestinian land. By a vote of 144 to 4, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution charging Israel of violating international law by building this illegal apartheid wall. As part of peaceful resistance to the occupation, Palestinians regularly paint graffiti art on sections of the barrier. Welcome everyone to Blackstone Intelligence. I'm Jake Morphonios. It's about 10:45 p.m. on Wednesday, November 29th, 2023. Welcome. Tonight's topic is Israeli apartheid and how it perpetuates violence, this cycle that never seems to end between the Palestinians, the Israelis, and the region in general, and the ripple effect that it has throughout the world. So we're going to be talking about this. Give me a thumbs up out there in the chat if my volume is good, and we'll get started. Just so you know, as many of you already know, I don't get super chats. I was demonetized years ago because I say things YouTube doesn't like. So if you would like to donate during the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/blackstoneintel and chip in there. A couple dollars buys me a coffee and helps to make this a profitable thing, keep me on the air. You can also go to patreon.com/blackstoneintel or paypal.me/blackstoneintel. I believe that this screen down here will update it if someone makes a donation there. So we're going to be talking, well, first of all, before I even get started, let me just throw out one piece of maybe it's gauche to say it's good news, but Henry Kissinger died today at 100 years old. Kissinger, you may know, has been he was a leading member of the New World Order for most of his life. He was the National Security Advisor under Nixon, also Secretary of State. And then when Gerald Ford took over, when Nixon was forced to resign, which Kissinger had a hand in helping to bring about. Gerald Ford took over for a little while, and he kept Kissinger on. Some people may not know this, but when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, the night before his nomination, the party nomination at the nominating convention, he still did not know who his vice presidential running mate was going to be. He wanted Gerald Ford, was one that was floated as somebody. Yeah, Ford had been president, but the idea was bring him back as vice presidential running mate. But Ford showed up, had a meeting with Reagan, and he said, "Look, I'll be your vice presidential running mate, but you have to bring back basically the neocon administration that Ford had inherited from Nixon." And it included bringing back Henry Kissinger as Secretary of State. Reagan said, "I'll be darned if I'm going to have an old administration come in and run the show." And so he was compelled to reach out to his arch nemesis during the campaign, George H.W. Bush, as his running mate, which turned out to be no better. H.W. Bush was deeply entrenched in the CIA. He had been kind of like Mike Pompeo, Bush had been the director of the CIA for a little while. And of course, he represented all of the oil interests that went on to cause all kinds of problems throughout the 80s and beyond. But anyway, Kissinger uh, is gone. 100 years old. Thought the guy was never going to go. And up through this month, he was still out there working away. Despite what I have to say about him, the man was tenacious and kept his brain going. He was a drunk. He'd go to the Bohemian Grove dressed in drag, all kind of lecherous behavior. But anyway, that was him. The way that the system works, in case you guys don't know this, is that the banking and investment class, the elites, the richest people, they decide what the goals are going to be for making money. They express their wishes to a Rothschild think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations. The CFR writes the policy. They hand the information over to the U.S. State Department, excuse me, where the Secretary of State codifies it. They implement it as official U.S. policy, and then it goes out there. The Bilderberg Group would help to carry out the will of the bankers and the investment class, and implement the CFR policies. The Bilderberg Group was basically the recruitment arm of the New World Order, bringing fresh blood in key sectors of influence, all different industries, media, entertainment, finance, and so forth, would recruit fresh blood, keeps them in place so when there is a need for something, they call on them. Anyway, Kissinger was a staple at the Bilderberg Group meetings. He was kind of the head honcho there that was at every meeting every year. He was there. And the Central Intelligence Agency is the enforcement arm of the CFR, of the bankers and the investment class. And when I talk about the investment class, I'm talking about those who have huge stakes in the war industry, in the oil industry. That's who the CFR, the U.S. State Department, the CIA actually represent. So anyway, Henry Kissinger, dead at 100 years old. He's gone, but everything that he stood for clearly lives on. We are going to go ahead and talk about Israel-Palestine. My voice isn't great. Hopefully it'll hold out here. I'm guessing this will take about 45 minutes to an hour tonight. I've had this cold for like 2 or 3 weeks now. It just lingers. Can't get rid of the doggone thing. But I've got my herbal tea here in my handy Palestinian mug. So you may see me sipping a lot. That's just to keep my voice going. All right, let's talk about Israel. You've got about 14 million people living over there between the Jordan River in the east, the Mediterranean Sea in the west. You've got about 14 million people living in this region historically called Palestine. Half of them are Jews, half of them are Palestinians, roughly 7 million each. The common perception, what most people believe, is that you've got basically two different systems. You've got a government for Israel, and we know that's led by Netanyahu and these far-right extremists that he's brought in to his administration. But a lot of people believe, well, the Palestinians have something called the Palestinian Authority, which is kind of a de facto government. And so they've got some autonomy and they rule for the Palestinians. And so you've got this division of people between Israel proper and then the Palestinian territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip. And it's separated from Israel proper by what's called the Green Line. This is kind of the ceasefire line that was drawn after the 1967 war. Common thought is that inside the borders of the sovereign state of Israel, you've got this democracy, and it represents the Israeli people, and it also represents the Arab citizens. You've got Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. So altogether, when you combine the 7 million Jews and then approximately 2 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel itself, you've got that body. And the other regime, this Palestinian body, is supposed to be governing the territories that Israel took over in 1967. And the idea that has been put forward, and this is, if you know anything about the Oslo Accords of the 1990s that Bill Clinton helped to bring about, the idea is that they've got the Palestinian Authority, which is this kind of pseudo government, and this government is going to be turned into the ruling government of the Palestinian state when that comes about. You'll hear talk all the time about a two-state solution, sometimes a one-state solution, but still, even the Israelis, you'll hear them talk all the time about Palestinian statehood. And so what they have now is just a temporary system in place, and that we're working towards something. All right, well, all of that is bullcrap. That's not true. Over time, while that was the idea in the beginning, in the earlier years, earlier decades, the distinction between these two groups, the Israelis and the Palestinians, when we talk about two state, one state, all of this is divorced from reality now. The state of affairs that has existed for 50 years has been this idea. We're working toward two states. Okay, 50 years. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish settlers in that time have moved into permanent settlements east of the Green Line, in the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank, living there as Israeli citizens, but living within the territories with all of the rights of Israeli citizens, not as people that are guests or residents or temporary people in Palestinian territory. Okay, then we've got East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem was officially annexed and by Israel. They claim it as their sovereign territory. The Palestinians, of course, reject this. East Jerusalem is predominantly Palestinian. But also, the West Bank itself has been annexed. Now, not officially. Officially, it's still Palestinian territory. But in practice, in real life practice, day-to-day life, it's already been annexed. The distinction blurs the fact that this entire area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, it's all part of one organization, one organizing principle that advances and that has cemented the supremacy of just one of these two groups, the supremacy of the Jews, over the Palestinians. Now remember, you've got about 7 million Palestinians, about 7 million Jews. All of this leads to the conclusion that there really aren't two parallel governments or regimes or bodies that are just kind of governing their different peoples. That's not how it is. There is one government, one regime that is in charge of this entire area, in charge of all of the people, even in the Palestinian territories. And again, it's based on that single organizing principle. The principle was put into law. They practiced it for years, but they actually in 2018, Israel put it into law. They codified the law. It's called the Basic Law. It's kind of their version of our U.S. Constitution. Israel doesn't have an official constitution. They have what's called the Basic Law. And Basic Law, codified in 2018, establishes a nation state specifically for Jewish people. Not for all people. It is a state for Jewish people. And in their Basic Law, it talks about how they need to annex the West Bank. And they tried to do that. Netanyahu tried to formally annex it in 2020, and it didn't happen. But what this means is that what happens in the occupied territories, we cannot treat what happens there as somehow separate from the rest of Israel. And when I say occupied territories, again, West Bank, the Gaza, the Golan Heights is Syrian territory, but we'll include that. But the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, they call it a prolonged occupation. But when we talk about an occupation, it's just not, it's not a fair representation of what is actually happening. Yes, and I will continue to call it a military occupation because it is a military occupation. But as far as the practical reality, it is a one state that has been established where the Palestinians have no control, no power, and they are relegated as less than second-class citizens. So what we have to do, if we're going to move forward, we have to deal with the reality that is on the ground. We have to talk about this apartheid system. And why am I bringing this up? This is not as sexy or exciting an issue to talk about as so many other things that I could cover. I mean, there's the mass slaughter going on in Gaza, all of the Israeli propaganda, much of it which can be debunked, all of the appearances by different Israeli talking heads, government officials, spokesmen. I mean, there's so many things that would be fun to talk about. But that really, it gets off into the weeds. It gets off into areas where you have straight up conflict when people bring it up. Because it takes something as simple as Al-Shifa Hospital. You have issues of, okay, Al-Shifa Hospital in northern Gaza. Missile comes down, and at first it was, all right, well, this blew up the hospital, killed 500 people. Then we find out, well, maybe it wasn't 500 people. And then it's, well, who shot it? There are good arguments on the one hand that it was an Israeli missile. The Israelis will make the argument that it was a misfired rocket by either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And each side has their arguments, bicker on Twitter and social media. It goes nowhere. Neither side makes any progress. And in the end, that issue does not really change anything. It doesn't move the conversation forward. So then we get into something like, all right, Al-Shifa Hospital, were there people there? It was Hamas in there fighting against Israel. You get the two sides arguing. Did Hamas build a great big bunker? Or was it pre-existing because Israel built it? You get the bickering. I can make the arguments in favor of the Palestinians on all of these, and I have. I do it all day long on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Twitter, go to at Morphonios or at blackstoneintel. I post at least a dozen, sometimes multiple dozen uh, arguments about different issues in favor of the Palestinians there. But it's a forum where nobody really budges from where they're already at, because these are not the core issues. These aren't the things that matter um, in a way that will move the conversation towards something else. Because when we get down to it, what really matters is, what is the source of this problem? Why is it that you've got the Jews talking nonstop about, we have a right to defend ourselves, we have a right to defend ourselves, we have a right to defend ourselves, this is all it is. Look at our 45-minute propaganda video that we've made that does show horrible atrocities being committed by Palestinian militants against Jews. You can't deny it when you see it. There are all kinds of arguments you can make, but they're intractable. That's it. It starts on October 7th. We don't care about context. We don't care about pretext. We don't care about what brought it about. And I've seen videos that I don't agree with, of some Palestinian activists who are saying the whole thing's fake. Hamas didn't do anything. It's the only people that were killed from the Israeli response with the Apache helicopters and the tank shelling and the kibbutzes and so on and so forth. Now, there were Jews killed by the Apache helicopter. There were plenty of people killed in the crossfire by Israel. But to deny that Hamas did anything wrong, that's equally wrong. So you have these two different sides of very contentious, very powerful arguments on either side, where there's so much emotion involved, neither side is budging. What does happen is people get so inflamed when they see that the other side is not listening to their fair arguments. Back and forth, I'm talking about each side, not listening to the other side, not acknowledging, you're right, what was done to Jews on October 7th was atrocious. Okay, we have to do that. On the other side, Jews have to say, what has been done since October 7th and prior to October 7th to Palestinians is unbelievable on a almost unimaginable scale. But neither side wants to have that kind of openness or honesty, because to do so, the ego gets involved, and people think, if I say that, if I give the other side that point, it somehow undermines me, and they're going to say, aha, see there, therefore our side is justified and you lose. So these things in the moment, while they're certainly worth discussing, and I do it constantly all day long, it does not move us closer to a solution, because each side can debate and argue each point, even if they're totally wrong. And this is something that, as someone who was trained in debate, I started taking debate in middle school, and then in high school I took debate classes. I continued debate in college, and I have debated hundreds upon hundreds of times. And my wife has pointed out to me, and she's correct, that I personally need to be very conscious of the fact that when she and I have a disagreement, I need to be responsible, because it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. I have superior debate techniques. I can shut down what she is saying and prove that she's wrong, even if she's not wrong, because I have that ability. Lawyers do this all the time. Lawyers can take someone who has committed atrocious crimes and make them look as innocent as possible. Debate technique does not mean, though, that what you're saying is valid. Most of the time, my wife is right and I'm wrong, even if she can't beat me in the debate. And so I have to consciously think, all right, I need to to step back and look at it for on its merits. Uh, and I used to do this. So I used to do this as a pro-Israeli, I won't say propagandist, but in the early 2000s during uh, the lead up to the second Intifada, I was a strong critic of uh, Palestinians. And I ignored a lot of what was valid from the Palestinian side because it was easy to point to what Hamas was doing in their attacks on civilians. Back then, you have to remember, back then, Second Intifada, there were suicide bombings upon suicide bombings. It was truly horrifying, targeting children in ice cream parlors, blowing up buses. It was horrible. And I could easily shut down anybody who faced me off faced off against me by bringing that up and making the argument about that and not letting them talk or bring forward their legitimate ideas that they had. What I'm saying is that this is how we are in social media. We can debate, we can argue with each other and not make any progress at all towards something constructive. So what I want to do tonight is to talk in a constructive way about what I think all of us should be focusing on as we debate or discuss these issues with family, with friends, and also to put this forward as much as we can in social media. And that is the root cause of this problem. Because if you can get truly to the root cause of the problem and keep bringing it to that, that's where we enlighten uh, other people, and we could be more fair because we don't have to be bombastic, we don't have to exaggerate, we don't have to focus on atrocities that are sensational. You don't have to focus on debunking the 40 beheaded baby myth. So let's talk about what matters. You've got 14 million people living there, half Jews, half Palestinians, living under a single rule, Israeli rule. There are not two separate regimes operating on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. There is one regime, and it is currently the Netanyahu regime. And the regime that is operating, that is controlling things, they implement laws and practices, they use state violence that cements an ideology that is just wrong. The ideology of the supremacy of one group over another group. Jews being supreme or preferred or more special or chosen with rights that are not allowed for the Palestinians. And through this ideology of supremacism, the territories are engineered in a way that Jews get special rights, Palestinians don't. Jewish citizens live as though the entire area is a single space. Now, we'll set aside maybe for a second the Gaza Strip because they pulled the settlements out in 2005, 2006, although we're looking at the possibility of them trying to reinstall them here in this next year. But within the West Bank, within East Jerusalem, the idea of this green line, this ceasefire line that's supposed to separate these two political territories, it means nothing to Israelis. It's irrelevant. Where the Palestinians live, the Israeli regime has divided that area into different units, and it gives the Palestinians different rights. The division has no impact on the rights of Israelis. It is only a division that impedes the rights of the Palestinians. They fragment it. So you've got Palestinians who live on land that is defined in back in 1948 as sovereign Israeli territory. Okay, and the Palestinians who live in this Israeli territory, what we call the state of Israel. Okay, Palestinians, sometimes they're called Arab Israelis. You'll hear them referred to as Arab Israelis because they have Israeli citizenship. And they make up about, a couple of years ago, it was 17%. I think it's probably around still 17, 18% of the citizens of the state of Israel. Now, this gives the Palestinian, or I'm going to call them for now the Arab Israelis, or Palestinian Israelis, gives them some rights that the non-Israeli Palestinians don't have. But not much. They do not enjoy the same rights as Jewish citizens, even though they are citizens of the state of Israel. You've got, over in East Jerusalem, about 350,000 Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. This is land that Israel annexed back in 1967. These people are permanent residents in East Jerusalem, permanent residents. They have a status that lets them to live there. They don't have to have special permits to work in Israel the way that, say, if you have West Bank Palestinians coming into Israel, they have to have special permits to work. Okay, those residents, permanent residents in East Jerusalem, don't need that. They can get some social benefits from the government. They can get Israeli health insurance. They're allowed to vote in municipal elections, not the federal elections, but they can vote in little local elections. But they're not, these people, they are not, those 350,000, they are not full citizens. Their residency can be revoked at any time. Israel can arbitrarily revoke the residency rights of these people in East Jerusalem, and they do it all the time. And you'll see videos in social media all the time of just these nasty Israeli settlers going in, Jewish settlers going in, kicking Palestinians out, well, of course, with the Israeli defense forces or security forces in there, booting people out of homes that they have lived in, them and their families, for generations, kicking them out, and Jews moving in who have never lived in that home before, because permanent residents have no real rights. Now, over in the West Bank, it's true that Israel still has not formally annexed the West Bank, but that doesn't change the fact that Israel treats the West Bank as its own territory. So in the West Bank, you've got about 3 million Palestinians that live there. They live in dozens of these pieces of the West Bank, the enclaves. There's rigid military rule. They don't have political rights. In about, if you add up all of the territory, about 40% of the territory, Palestinians have some civilian powers that were given to the Palestinian Authority through the Oslo Accords. But the Palestinian Authority is still subordinate to Israel. they can't exercise true autonomy because Israel doesn't grant them autonomy. That's why you have so much angst of Palestinians in the West Bank against the leader of the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas. He works with Israel all the time to suppress the Palestinians. He's supposed to represent the Palestinians, but the truth is, Abbas represents Israel. Then you go over to the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip has 2.3 million Palestinians. They are denied political rights. So, like I said a minute ago, back in 2005, Israel withdrew its forces from the Gaza Strip. They dismantled the settlements that they had built there previously. And they said, all right, you know what? We're out, and we abdicate all responsibility for the fate of the people of Gaza. Not our problem. We wash our hands of it. But after Hamas took over in 2007, you say, oh, well, the people in Gaza voted in Hamas. They still don't have any power because Israel, when they pulled out, they imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip. This is back in 2007. It's still in place. Throughout all of these years, Israel has continued to control just about every aspect of life in Gaza, but they do it from the outside rather from living inside it. So everywhere you go, Israel is giving Palestinians a different package of rights that are in every way inferior to the rights given to Jews. The goal of Jewish supremacism in this political context, they advance it differently in the various territories. And so you have different degrees of injustice depending on where you live. The way things are done in the West Bank are bad, but the way things are done in Gaza is even worse in a lot of respects. And it's different from how they are in East Jerusalem. So the Palestinians don't have some kind of unified system of government because they're not in control. What power they do have, as limited as it is piecemeal, and it differs from one area to another. What happens in Gaza is different from the West Bank, which is different from East Jerusalem. So there is no unity there. There's no cohesion. And again, the Palestinians who are actual citizens, who have Israeli citizenship in Israel proper, they don't have the same rights and privileges as the Jews, as their Jewish neighbors. They are treated as inferiors by other people who live in the same area that they do. Now, there's 4 major ways that Israel implements this Jewish supremacy. 2 of them are implemented kind of the same by restricting immigration, or not immigration, restricting migration by the non-Jews. That's one way. By taking over Palestinian land to build Jewish-only communities and then stuffing the Palestinians into these tiny little enclaves. So those are 2 ways. The other 2 are implemented in, and that applies to all of the areas, but the other 2 are applied specifically to the militarily occupied territories, like in the West Bank. Draconian restrictions on movement of Palestinians, denial of political rights. The entire area that the Palestinians live in is under the control of Israel. Israel has the sole power over, like, registering the population. Israel has control over allocating land, over controlling the voter rolls, and the right even to travel outside of those territories or travel even within it to enter, say, the West Bank or to exit the West Bank. Israel controls that. So I'm going to talk for a minute about these four things in a little more detail. Immigration. Immigration is something that is only allowed for the Jews. If you're a Jew anywhere in the world, you, your children, your spouse, your grandchildren, any of you are entitled to immigrate to Israel at any time, and you will be granted Israeli citizenship with all of the rights of other Israelis. The crazy thing is, if you are a Jew, say, living in New York City, you immigrate to Israel. You can choose, as a Jew, you can choose to immigrate to the West Bank into a settlement. Even though it's not official Israeli territory, it's Palestinian territory, you can immigrate. You have the right to move into a Jewish settlement in the West Bank. If you are a Palestinian living outside of the West Bank, you have no right to move into the West Bank without permission of Israel. You can't even enter into Israeli-controlled areas like these settlements. And the granting of status, it's just up to the discretion of the Jewish officials. Specifically, the power is vested in the Interior Ministry inside of sovereign Israel. But if you're talking about like the occupied territories, West Bank, Gaza, the power to grant status of residency or whatever, that goes to the military commander in the occupied territories. Ariel Sharon, was it Sharon? No, maybe not. I can't remember the guy's name right now. A general who had been back when the Jews did have settlements in Gaza. The governor, military general over Gaza. He's the one that was in charge of receiving money from the Israeli government and funneling it into Hamas to build Hamas up to be a foil against the Fatah party, which was the party of Yasser Arafat, and that's how Hamas was developed. They funneled the money in through the mosques in Gaza, and Hamas would take the money, and they started out as a charitable and Islamic charity. They would give money to people to try and help out with education, with health, and stuff like that. So the people fell in love with Hamas. Little did they know that it was actually Jewish money coming in, and actually a lot of it originated from U.S. taxpayers. And some of these billions of dollars that we give to Israel each year gets funneled different ways. But anyway, if you're a Palestinian living in some other country, you can't immigrate to any part of Israel-Palestine. It doesn't matter if your parents are from there. It doesn't matter if your grandparents are from there. It doesn't matter if all of your ancestors are from the West Bank. You can't immigrate there. The only way that Palestinians can immigrate to these areas, which Israel controls, is if you marry a Palestinian who already lives there and you meet certain conditions and get Israeli approval, and that almost never happens. It's very rare. Israel not only hampers Palestinian immigration, but it screws with their ability to move around. You can't move between the West Bank to Gaza, for example. And you can't even move from the West Bank to East Jerusalem if Israel perceives that this is going to somehow upgrade your rights. So, for example, Palestinian citizens of Israel, talking about the Arab Israelis or the permanent residents of East Jerusalem, they can downgrade. Okay, if you are a Palestinian citizen of Israel, Israel will allow you to move to the West Bank. But you think you're going to get back? So they let you downgrade. They don't let you move up in the eyes of the rights of the Israeli government. So Palestinians that live in any of these occupied territories, they can't get Israeli citizenship. They can't move to Israeli territory. Israeli Jews can move to the West Bank, to any number of settlements. You've got in the West Bank, you have 700,000 Jews living there. It's not their territory. They don't have permission. Palestinians are not saying, hey, you're welcome to build settlements here on land that you're stealing. But they have no say in the matter. And Israel's policy is consciously set up in a way to try and fracture Palestinian families. So for years, the Israel has put all kinds of obstacles on families where you have one spouse who comes from one geography, another spouse who comes from another one. Okay. So for example, if you're a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank and it's not that many miles away to the Gaza Strip, if you have fallen in love with a Palestinian in the Gaza Strip, you try and get married, good luck. And if you do manage to get married, it's not like you can move around from territory to live together. And so you have literally tens of thousands over time, tens of thousands of families that have been living separately within these various Palestinian territories. They can't live together, even though they're married. Fathers not living with their children, spouses not living together. So if you're a spouse in the Gaza Strip, sure, your family can live there. But if the other spouse is a resident of the West Bank, that would be an upgrade. So you can't have the spouse from Gaza move to the West Bank. You can downgrade. You can move from the West Bank to Gaza with permission from Israel. In 2003, the Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, they passed an order that was supposed to be temporary. Now, that was 2003. Here we are 20 years later. It's still in force. They passed a temporary order banning the issuance of Israeli citizenship or permanent residency to Palestinians from the occupied territories who married Israeli citizens. So if you're an Israeli, Arab Israeli, Jewish Israeli, and you marry a Palestinian from the West Bank, for example, they don't become an Israeli citizen. Now, if you are a German and you marry a Jew, an Israeli Jew, sure, you can become a citizen. If you're a Canadian, if you're American, if you're Russian, if you're Ukrainian, if you're Venezuelan, and you marry an Israeli Jew, you can become an Israeli citizen. Not if you are Palestinian, though, because they don't want any power They want to do anything they can to erode the power of the Palestinian people. They undermine the right of Palestinians in the occupied territories to even keep living in the places that they were born. So since 1967, 250,000 Palestinians in the West Bank and some in the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, if they have moved away for 3 years and come back, they lose their status. So what this means, their status as residents or the right to live there. So if you are a Palestinian in the West Bank and you do manage to move out and you're gone for 3 years, you're not getting you're not coming back, not with any rights. But this applies even to thousands of people in East Jerusalem. You've got Jerusalem, kind of west and east, thousands of Palestinians who lived in East Jerusalem, permanent residents who moved just a couple of miles east of their homes to like you've got, I don't know how to show it here. I don't have a map in front of me, but if you've got Jerusalem here and here's the West Bank, if you move just a couple of miles here and live there, you are robbed of the right to return to your home. Even if you still own the property in East Jerusalem, you may not move back. Israel takes it. You could have been born in that home in East Jerusalem. You could have been raised there your whole life. You move out, you're not coming back. So Israel practices, it calls it Judaizing. Okay, they Judaize areas like East Jerusalem because the mindset of this Jewish supremacism is that the land there is meant to be used exclusively for the benefit of Jews. So land development, expanding existing communities to build new ones. Jews can do that. You can develop land. You can build new settlements. You cannot do that if you're Palestinian. You get crowded into these little enclaves and you can't leave it. You can't move out and expand. Land use is a big issue over there because there's a much higher birth rate among the Palestinians than among the Jews. Setting aside the ultra Orthodox, they have a high birth rate as well. But Arab Palestinians have got a much higher birth rate than Jews. And so the idea is keep them compressed. Don't let them expand, even in the West Bank, outside of these little enclaves that Israel controls. So I was talking about that 2018 basic law, the Jewish supremacism document. Excuse me. It basically says that the Jewish state sees Jewish settlements in the West Bank and elsewhere. This has national value, and so they encourage it. They want Jews to settle. They want Jews to expand because it serves the purposes of a Jewish supremacist state. So that's okay. You can do that. Not only can you do it, but they encourage it. There's all kinds of tax benefits, stipends. You can earn an income by being a settler. Israel pushes settlements. Now, inside Israel proper, you've got just the opposite for Palestinians. So very discriminatory laws, like the absentee property law, where um, what they do is they take Palestinian-owned land, and I'm talking about huge areas. Over there, they don't talk about acres. Here in the United States, we talk about how many acres do you own. Over there, they have dunams. A dunam is this is like an old thing from the Ottoman Empire. That they use over there. A dunam is about 1,000 square meters. Okay, kind of their equivalent of our acre. So Israel will take millions of dunams in Palestinian communities where they have driven Palestinians out, going all the way back to 1948. And they bar the Palestinians from returning. And they say this is now Israeli land. And they deny the right of the Palestinian refugees to come back to their lands. And so Israel has so reduced the area that is designated for Palestinian communities to about 3% of the country's total area. What they do is they take the land, they saturate it with construction, with building settlements on it. And so more than 90% of the land in Israel, it doesn't matter if it used to be Palestinian. It's now under Israeli state control. And that's really crazy when you consider the absolute fact, verifiable, documented fact, that the year that Israel declared independence in 1948, Jews legally owned about 4 to 5% of the land. So how did they get 90% of the land? They used force. They used violence. They committed ethnic cleansing. It's called the Nakba, the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe, where they took their military, their terrorist organizations and their military, and they drove Palestinians out of hundreds and hundreds of villages and towns just to take it. They don't own it, not legally. And since then, they have built hundreds of communities for Jewish citizens. How many communities has Israel built for Palestinians? 0. Even the Palestinian Bedouins, who are kind of nomadic, land that they have been on, that's been registered as state land, it was Palestinian land. And so what Israel does is they designate Bedouin land as unrecognized. And they classify Bedouins as invaders. Even though it's land that the Bedouins have lived on for centuries, Israel goes in, builds Jewish-only communities, and when the Bedouins try and come back to their own territory, their own land, they call them invaders. Tons of videos on YouTube of Israel going into Bedouin camps and bulldozing their camps, going to their wells and filling their wells with cement. They'll back up a cement truck and dump cement into their wells to make it so they can't access water. They cut off sewage for these Palestinian communities. And then what they do is, by declaring the land to be Israeli land, they can't build. You destroy one Palestinian community, so they go to rebuild, but too late. Israel has declared that land to legally be Israeli territory. And because you can't rebuild anything without an Israeli permit, which they do not give to Palestinians ever, they say that they have this legal power, Israel does, to prevent Palestinians from building up places to live. They don't let them construct new things. Even on remaining land in Palestinian communities, they'll go and say, well, this is even when Israel has not gotten around yet to building a settlement on Palestinian land, what they'll do is declare it something like a nature reserve, an Israeli nature reserve. And so you can't build on that. So you have the Palestinian population, just like anywhere in the world, populations expand, but the land shrinks. And so the result is you've got these small, dwindling enclaves where, because of population growth, you have no choice but to build without permits. Can't live on top of each other. So they build, but they don't have these permits. Israel has passed a law that allows, also, this is another big thing. There are hundreds of Jewish committees throughout these territories where Israel has given a law granting these Jewish committees, local committees, the authority to reject their neighboring Palestinian neighbors, to reject their applications to get building permits based on, I kid you not, cultural incompatibility. And so it effectively prevents Palestinian citizens from, I'm talking about Palestinian citizens of Israel, Israeli citizens. I'm not talking about the people in the West Bank. I'm talking about actual Palestinian Arab Israeli citizens who can't build homes because of cultural incompatibility. Now, do you understand why Israel is so intent on mowing the grass? The phrase that Israel has used for justifying mass murder, usually a few thousand Palestinians at a time, which they do every few years. Officially, any Israeli, any Jew can live in any of the country's cities, but the Israeli Palestinians, the Arab Israeli citizens, they can live on roughly 10% of the land that Jewish citizens can, that Jewish Israelis can. And they've used the same organizing principle in the West Bank since 1967. You've got hundreds of thousands of dunams or acres, farmland, pasture land that has been taken for various pretexts, taken away from the Palestinians and used to either establish or to expand Jewish settlements, Jewish residential neighborhoods, Jewish farmland, Jewish industrial zones. All of the settlements are closed military zones. Palestinian can't enter it. So far, Israel has established, I don't know what it's up to now. A couple of years ago, it was up to 280 settlements. And I know that since Netanyahu came back to power, it's just hit the turbo boost. You've got 700,000 Jews living in these illegal settlements, considered illegal by the international community, because when a military, even in a time of war, if a military defeats another power, you cannot go and settle your people on their lands, because it can't be done without oppressing the local population. And so under international law, the Geneva Conventions that the whole world, except for the United States and a couple others, agree to abide by, it's considered a war crime. to um, to do this. And of course, the roads are built to bypass the Palestinian areas, flyovers, so that the settlers can go wherever they want to within the Palestinian territories, not have to be bothered by seeing seeing any of these people. In the West Bank, you've got huge swaths of land that Palestinians are not allowed to build on. It's state land, nature reserve, national park. Authorities in Israel do not account for, in the planning, the zoning. They don't plan, they don't anticipate the needs of a Palestinian community. Knowing that it is going to expand, they ignore that. They don't care. They will gobble up all of the land. Okay, let's talk about restrictions on movement. The Israelis they can't go to the Gaza Strip. Okay, doesn't matter if you're uh, Arab Israeli, Jewish Israeli, you can't go to the Gaza Strip. It's considered hostile territory. There are a lot of, and Israeli citizens cannot go to, under the Oslo Accords, the West Bank was divided into areas A, B, and C. Area A is supposed to be under full Palestinian control. And so they say, well, you can't go there. Israeli citizens can leave Israel anytime they want, and they can come back anytime they want. But like I said earlier, if you're um, like a permanent resident in East Jerusalem, you don't hold an Israeli passport. If you go outside your home, you're going to lose it. Israel restricts the movement of Palestinians even in the West Bank. They don't let them, generally speaking, go between the different units, say over to Gaza, for example. They certainly aren't going to go to East Jerusalem. If Palestinians from the West Bank want to go into Israel, they have to apply. It's never approved. Very rarely approved. I won't say never. In the Gaza Strip, which has been blockaded since 2007, the population is imprisoned. It's a giant concentration camp. Israel does not allow people to leave. You cannot leave the Gaza Strip. I think in the last year they had approved a small number of workers because Israel was in desperate need suddenly of super low wage workers, and so they approved some from Gaza to come in, which of course they've eliminated that again. But for all these years, if you're in the Gaza Strip, you're stuck there. You're not leaving. There's a special application that you can file, but you're not going to get approved. The permits are issued very sparingly. There's no clear rules. You don't know. It's even worse than like trying to figure out what YouTube's rules are. You know what they use to demonetize accounts. It's arbitrary. They change it all the time because YouTube has that clause in there that they added in a few years ago that kind of says we have the right to change the rules at any point without your knowledge or your agreement, and you're still obligated to obey us, or we're going to get you. In the West Bank, Israel controls the routes between the different enclaves. They let the military set up checkpoints everywhere. They close off access between Palestinian villages. The military blocks the roads. They stop passage through the checkpoints. When I was over there traveling through the West Bank, it was every handful of miles. You have to stop and sit there at the checkpoint. IDF soldiers there with their automatic rifles. They make you get out. Some of it, I was on a bus. They would get on there, walk around on the bus with their gun, Demand your papers. So the Palestinians in the West Bank, they're barred from entering a lot of their own territory without being subjected to incredible harassment. As a rule, Israel doesn't let Palestinians who are allowed to leave in those rare instances. It's not like they can fly out of the Israeli airport, the Ben Gurion airport, international airport. That's what I flew into in Tel Aviv. If a Palestinian is allowed to leave, sorry, you don't get to use the local airport. What they have to do is get permission from Jordan. First, you have to get permission from Israel. Then you have to get permission from Jordan because you have to go into Jordan to fly out of their international airport. But you have to get permission from Israel to cross the border. There are thousands and thousands of people, Palestinians, who with no explanation, they're denied the chance to cross the border, to go fly somewhere. Palestinians in Gaza, they don't get to go through Jordan because that's on the other side. They have to go down through the Rafah crossing, which is controlled by Egypt, go all the way through the Sinai Peninsula and try and fly out from there. But even that's a rare thing. Let's talk for a second about voting rights, okay, political rights of the Palestinians. So the Arab Israelis, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, they can take political action to further their own interests. They can vote. They can run for office. They can try and elect representatives. They can join political parties. That being said, Palestinian officials are vilified. It is terrible to be a Palestinian government official. A Palestinian Israeli, I say Palestinian, I'm talking about an Arab Israeli citizen. The right of Palestinian citizens to engage in any meaningful political activity, it looks good on paper for citizens, but it doesn't work out that way. The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, you have 120 members of the parliament. Currently, 10 of them, 10 of the 120 are Arab Israeli citizens. Despite the fact that 1.6 million Israeli Palestinians are citizens, okay, or Palestinians are Israeli citizens. So you've got roughly 5 million Palestinians who live in the occupied territories. They can't participate in a political system that governs their lives because the political system that governs their lives is in Israel. So you've got 7 million Jewish citizens of Israel. You have 2 million Arab citizens of Israel. So 9 million Israeli citizens. But when you add in 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, 2.3 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, you come to those figures I gave you earlier. You have 7 million Jews, 7.3 million Palestinians. Okay, so 52% of the population is Palestinian. They have 8% representation in the parliament. Does that seem fair? Do you think Palestinians are going to get a good deal with 8% representation? 92% Jewish representation? 92% Jewish representation, despite the fact that they only make up 48% of the combined population. Theoretically, Palestinians are supposed to be able to vote in the Palestinian Authority elections, right? That's what the Oslo Accords were supposed to set up. Even though the Palestinian Authority's powers were very limited, even on paper, The truth is that elections were last held 17 years ago in 2006. But even if elections were ongoing, it doesn't matter because the power is with Israel. The Israeli government is what controls what happens in the Palestinian territories. It is not the Palestinian Authority. It is not the people that, if you're in the West Bank, if you're in Gaza, who you vote for, what they do does not really impact your life. What matters is what happens in Israel, in the Knesset. They maintain all control over all the major aspects of governance in the Palestinian territories. So is 8% representation fair? No, but that's by design. The Jews control Palestinian immigration, population registry, land policies. They control Palestinian water. They control Palestine's communication infrastructure. They control what Palestinians can import and export. And of course, the Israeli military has total control over everything on the ground, everything in the sea off the Gaza Strip, the airspace over the Palestinian territories. Now, if you're a Palestinian, an Arab Israeli living in East Jerusalem, you're caught between a rock and a hard place. You're a permanent resident of Israel, and you can vote in your kind of little city elections, but you cannot vote for members of the parliament. So you're disenfranchised. On the other hand, Israel makes it very difficult for them to participate in the Palestinian Authority elections. So you have no real political power if you're in East Jerusalem. Freedom of speech is curtailed by Israel. Freedom of association is curtailed by Israel. These rights that here in the United States, we say these are God-given rights. They are natural rights that we are born with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, that to pursue these rights, governments are instituted among men, blah, 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 deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That does not exist. I get so sick of people saying, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Really? That would be like saying, well, the United States, we're a democracy, but if you're a Jew, you can't vote. If you are a Jewish American, you can't vote for members of Congress. Now imagine if Jews made up 52% of the United States and they were not allowed to vote for the representatives in Congress. Would that be a democracy? Do you know that in Israel, if you are a Jew in Israel, you cannot get, here in the United States, if you're going to get married, you have to get a marriage certificate. In Israel, no marriage certificate is issued ever for a Jew to marry an Arab. Is that a democracy? Is it a democracy when Israel brought in all of the, they try and bump up their Jewish population. They had to import a lot of Ethiopian Jews, right? What did they do to the Ethiopian Jews? They sterilized them. They injected them, the women, with birth control without telling them that's what they were doing. They were saying, oh, these are vaccines and we're giving you medicine that you need to come into Israel. Look it up. Is that what a democracy does? So if you live over there, if you're an Arab Israeli citizen, you ought to be able to have the right to vote. You ought to be able to critique your government, to protest policies that you don't like. You ought to be able to post on social media. Now, if you've been following in social media, you see that not only the Arab Israelis but also Jewish Israelis are getting snatched up. Police are going around in recent the last month or so because they retweeted something that Israel didn't like. They're supporting terrorism. They're inciting terrorism when they share something on Instagram that they saw opposing the genocide being committed in Gaza. You're inciting terrorism. Is that a democracy? You don't have the freedom to criticize policies over there. Right now, there are Jews in Israel who want badly to take a stand against what Israel is doing to the people in Gaza. They can't do it, not without facing imprisonment. And the Palestinians in the occupied territories, their restrictions are even worse. They're not allowed to demonstrate. They can't go out. Why do we never see in the West Bank Palestinians out there with signs doing marches? Why is that? It's because Palestinian Authority stooge Mahmoud Abbas uses the Palestinian police, the little security apparatus that Palestine has them work shoulder to shoulder with Israeli security to stifle any demonstrations. After October 7th and the weeks after that, there were Palestinians killed in the West Bank by Palestinian police under the control of the Palestinian Authority, or more accurately, by the real authority, which is Israel. And all of these things, in the occupied territories, it's not like you get justice. It's not like you can go to court and defend yourself because you're not a citizen. Military courts have imprisoned over the years hundreds of thousands of Palestinians for demonstrations and violations of petty things that are basic rights here in the United States. In Israel proper, they don't allow Arab Israelis in East Jerusalem to coordinate any kind of cultural or political activity that is associated in any way with the occupied territories. Keep them separate. So it fractures the Palestinian efforts to get justice, to get to secure their rights. This fragmentation only helps one party, the Jews. So let's review. Let's kind of summarize here what we've been talking about. From the river to the sea, you've got 14 million people living there. A slight majority of them are Palestinians, roughly 52% to 48%. Palestinian majority. Jewish supremacy, though, is the law of the land, not just for Israel proper, but for all of the Palestinian territories as well. To achieve this, what Israel has done is they have chopped up these different territories, the Palestinian territories, giving different rights to different groups, different restrictions, different laws and regulations. They deny the rights to the Palestinians to self-determination. They advance their policies they socially engineer the Palestinian territories. They issue orders that allow any Jew in the world to they can come in. Their relatives can come in. They get Israeli citizenship and all those rights. They can move into Jewish-only settlements throughout the Palestinian territories, but they deny all of these rights to the Palestinians. And they have physically engineered the entire area so that you've got millions of acres of land that have set up Jewish-only communities that keep expanding and expanding and expanding, while the Palestinian territories, the little enclaves within Palestinian land, get crunched into smaller enclaves. And you can clearly see what they're doing in Gaza. You think they're going after Hamas in Gaza? That's not what it's about. It's ethnic cleansing. It's drive the people down into the south, utterly waste, annihilate the infrastructure in North Gaza. Now you've got them down in South Gaza. Now what is Israel going to do? They're going to annihilate cities in South Gaza, create so much terror, they're going to try and force the Palestinians through the Rafah crossing into Egypt and never let them back in again. Hey, we got all this empty land. What's going to happen? You know what's going to happen. Israel is going to return to settlement building. They're going to take the land for themselves. They're certainly going to take the oil reserves offshore, off the coast of Gaza, which is one of the reasons they're doing this. And in the meantime, they are restricting Palestinian movement. They are restricting Palestinians, millions of them, from participating in a democratic process that enables the Palestinians to have a say in their own lives, in their own futures. There is no such thing for Palestinians as self-determination, not while they're living under military occupation. A regime that uses laws like this, that engages in practices like this, that uses organized violence to cement the supremacy of one group over the others. What do we call that? That is apartheid. Israel is an apartheid state. They promote the supremacy of Jews even over Arabs who are also citizens of Israel. That is apartheid. I've outlined for this last hour and a half. I've gone through over and over and over all of these different privileges that Jews have that Arab citizens of Israel do not have. And this apartheid system has become institutionalized and more explicit. They didn't want it to be called apartheid. But Jewish supremacy was enshrined in 2018 under the Basic Law, which makes it a binding constitutional principle, Jewish supremacy. Normal laws you can challenge, right? Like, for example, in the United States, if there's a law that you don't like, you can challenge it. You can get that law overturned. But can you overturn the right to freedom of speech? Can you overturn the right for a black person to vote? Can you overturn the right for a woman to vote in the United States? No, because it is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. It's unfortunate we didn't have those laws to begin with, but eventually we got them. And now that we do have them, they're not going anywhere. You would have to have a constitutional amendment, which requires all of the states to get involved, have a constitutional convention. It's not going to happen. Likewise, in Israel, Jewish supremacy is now the constitutional law of the land. You can't challenge it. And it also means that all Israeli institutions don't have the option. They must, by law, they must promote Jewish supremacy in every conceivable area of existence under Israeli control. Now, Israel's plan to annex the West Bank bridges the gap between what is this fairy tale notion that the Palestinian Authority is the government of the Palestinians. The plan to annex the West Bank bridges the gap between that and all of this empty rhetoric that you always hear from Israelis when they're pushed, which is rare, but when they're pushed in media, they'll say, oh yeah, two-state solution. Trust us, we're working toward the two-state solution. There is no two-state solution. Settlements have annihilated any hope of a two-state solution. At least in the kind of two-state solution that we have considered in decades past. Israel did not follow through on the Netanyahu's declaration back in 2020 to annex formally and officially the West Bank, even though he had full support of the Trump administration that was pushing like crazy for it as well, with Jared Kushner and all of the hardcore Zionists, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, all of these Zionists pushing like crazy for Israel. Go, finally just declare it, make it official. Despite that, the fact on the ground is that Israel has already annexed the West Bank. They have control over it. They want to make it permanent, officially permanent. This has been declared by the highest officials in the Israeli government. Now, the rationale of these politicians, these Israeli politicians, is, I may be older than some of you. Younger viewers are not going to be as familiar with the 1980s and the big push to end South African apartheid. The South African regime wanted to have supremacy of white citizens, partly through partitioning the population into different classes and subclasses and giving different rights, overtly giving different rights to you if you were white or if you were black. Now, back then, South Africa was open about this. They said it. They announced it as policy. But because of the backlash, the international backlash against this, what a fiasco it was as far as public relations and the resulting boycotts of South Africa, Israel saw that lesson. And by the way, Israel was one of the staunchest supporters of South African apartheid for obvious reasons. But Israel learned the lesson. You don't want to openly call yourself an apartheid regime. But you do it in by your actions. Israel's very, very touchy. Oh, we're not an apartheid regime. We're not an apartheid regime. If you list the laws that show the separation between them, well, yeah, but it's because it's a Jewish state. So, all right, so you are an apartheid state. As far as public opinion and international approval, they're not going to get permission to be an apartheid state. But that doesn't stop what they're doing. Conditions are deteriorating further, which they have been for years, but since October 7th, man, is it getting worse. There's not even official legislation. The Israel is doing things that's even outside of its own laws. They are using the excuse of Israel has a right to defend itself. We can commit mass murder, ethnic cleansing. We can take all of this land because we're defending ourselves. It's very similar to after 9/11. You remember what our neocons did after the 9/11 attacks? They weren't as brazen in the rhetoric as Israel is, but it was the same idea. The neocons were like, well, got all that oil over in Iraq, got oil all over the place. There's so much that can be accomplished if we invade these countries. And we have to do it. We have to go to war with Iraq because of self-defense. Did Iraq have anything to do with 9/11? No. The fact was, Iraq actually fought against Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was operating among the Kurds in Iraq. You would hear the lines sometimes from the Bush administration, Saddam Hussein gasses his own people. Yeah, it's true. The guy did use chemical weapons, but not so much on his own people. He was gassing the Kurds who were working with Al-Qaeda, who were working with the CIA to try and overthrow the Iraqi government. The neocons had been after it for a long time, and it didn't work. So here comes 9/11, and you got your pretext, got your excuse. There are all kinds of different political paths that Israeli citizens could take. Things that I'm talking about the people of conscience in Israel, and they are the minority. The things that they could do. There are things that the international community could do to pressure Israel that would help to bring about true freedom from the river to the sea. But no progress toward that is going to be made until we reach a critical mass of understanding. In the beginning of this show, I talked about all of these things that we fight about in social media. And they are newsworthy and they are worth debating and they are worth talking about. And I'm not suggesting at all that we shouldn't talk about these things. But because it's so easy for there to be a stalemate and people not come around to any kind of agreement on the peripheral issues, what we have to do is get back to the core issue, which is that Israel is an apartheid state that subjugates not just the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but they subjugate their own Arab Israeli citizens. I mean, they are half a step away from Arab Israelis not being able to drink out of the same water fountains as Jewish Israelis. We here in America know a thing or two about segregation. We did something about it. We worked toward improving conditions. We have a ways to go in a few areas still, but we have trended in the right direction. Israel is trending the opposite direction. Imagine if the United States was working backwards. Imagine if now we were working toward not letting blacks drink out of water fountains or ride the same transportation as us, or forced segregation in schools. Would that look good? We're not supposed to go backwards. That is what the Jewish state is doing. They are working backwards. This is something that we can illustrate in conversations to people. We can help people to see that apartheid, a difference of basic human rights for one group that are denied to the other group, that has to end. Israeli apartheid has to end. Because when there is a system of injustice like that, especially when it is coupled with such grotesque, widespread violence, as we see the Jewish Israelis committing against the Palestinians. It breeds violent reprisal. No people are ever satisfied with being subjugated. Nobody is satisfied seeing their children getting shot in the streets or picked up and thrown in a gulag. No people are going to be happy having their lands stolen from them. As long as these injustices take place, as long as there are masses and masses and masses of Palestinian children being butchered by Jews, you are going to have a cycle of violence that will never end. And that cycle of violence has a ripple effect. You cannot have so much violence being perpetrated against one group of people and it not reverberate outside of that region into surrounding regions and throughout the world. What Israel is doing to the Palestinian people through apartheid, through occupation, has an impact on the rest of us. Because any day, things could escalate in such a way as to draw in Iran, Hezbollah, which would be a bigger Israeli response, which would bring in the United States, which brings in direct conflict between Iran and the United States, which brings in Syria. Even North Korea has made threats. Russia gets involved. You have World War III. Does the sound of global thermonuclear war not suggest to you that this issue can impact everybody? It is important for all of us to get involved and do something about this. Because as long as Israel is creating an environment of misery and injustice, there will be response, and it will not always be peaceful, nor should it always be peaceful, because when there is a violent regime committing incredible acts of ethnic cleansing, mass murder, call it genocide, against a civilian population in such large numbers, there will be violent resistance, and there should be. Just like each of us in our homes, if someone came and attacked our families, peaceful resistance to somebody who is shooting our children is not the way to go. The way to go is to pick up whatever you can get your hands on and fight back to protect your family. That's going to continue. So end the cycle of violence by getting to the core issue, which is the apartheid system and the occupation. Do you see now why the idea of a Jewish-only state doesn't work? This is why the phrase or the idea, the concept of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Sure, there's some people who will take that and interpret it as, we're going to wipe out all the Jews. They are rare. Certainly does not represent the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people. But there are always going to be extremists. That is not what it means. For most everybody who repeats that phrase, from the river to the sea, it's about justice and equality. Now, if there can be a two-state solution, great. I don't think that that's going to work because of the degree to which Israel has infiltrated Palestinian territories. How can you have a nation, how can you have a country that is so chopped up like Swiss cheese with foreigners living all throughout it. It doesn't work. So either you need a hybrid two-state solution where you have, fine, the Jewish settlers stay, but they are there as um, uh, with no political authority, or you have a one-state solution. And in a one-state solution, you cannot have a Jewish state. You can't have it. Just like here in the United States, you can't have a whites-only state. You can't have a Mexican-only state in the United States. You can't have an Italian-only state. You can't have a Catholic-only state. You can't have a Christian-only state. When you have a multicultural society, you can't let one side dominate the other with laws that suppress the rights of the other party. Likewise, in the region of Israel-Palestine, you cannot have a Palestinian majority being suppressed by a Jewish minority. It doesn't work. There should be no Jewish state unless you have just Jews. You say, well, there are Muslim-only states or Muslim states. That's right. Yeah, when you've got 98, 99% of the population is Muslim, I'm not for any state anywhere in the world being, being based on a religion. I believe in secular governance anywhere. But you can't have half the population as non-Jew and then say it's a Jewish-only state. It just doesn't work. It's not about anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with it. The anti-anything is anti-humanity. If you say you're not a Jew, so you don't get the rights that I do, what the hell is that? It's apartheid. Apartheid is not something that civilized nations can countenance. Israel, as long as it's going to have Palestinians in it, and I don't mean just Israel proper. Israel is controlling all of the Palestinian territory. So we're not going to count just the 2 million Palestinians who are citizens in Israel. We must count all of the Palestinians that Israel is in control over. And there is a Palestinian majority. You cannot have a Jewish state. It's wrong. It is wrong to deny other people the same rights because their skin color is different, they're a different religion, whatever. The whole thing's a travesty from top to bottom because until the big Rothschild push in the early 1900s to bump up to fund all of this mass migration. I'm talking about before World War II. So we can't use there was the Holocaust, and so that's why we need it. I'm talking about before then. Zionism was pushing to change, to flip what was 80% Arab population in Palestine, to flip that to make it a Jewish majority in less than 100 years. And the way you accomplish that is not just through immigration, but by driving the local population, the indigenous people, out into other countries so that you can take the land for yourself. Take Jews and Arabs out of it. Where else in the world of any other ethnic or religious group would we allow such a thing? Could we tolerate it? Could we somehow argue and justify it? We look back at what European colonialists did to drive the Native Americans out of the land. Look at what was done through British colonialism for centuries. These things are not okay. We're supposed to have moved past that. I cannot go back and undo what was done to Native Americans. I cannot go back and undo what was done during the time of slavery. I can't go back and fix things that happened before I was born, but I can take a stand for injustice that exists while I am alive. This is the biggest issue facing humanity when it comes to social justice of any kind. It has not only ramifications for the Palestinian people, but it has potential impact on the rest of us throughout the world. I don't want my children or grandchildren dying in some nuclear war because my generation was too afraid of being called anti-Semites to take a firm stand against apartheid and try and compel Israel through every legal and moral means possible to change their ways. I hope you'll join me in this. I hope that as you debate this in social media, first of all, I hope that you will debate this in social media, but I hope that as you do it, you'll focus as much as possible on the core issues. Always bring it back to the occupation. If the occupation was over, if the apartheid was over, if there was justice and equality between Jews and Arabs, there could be peace. The terrorism would essentially go away. There's always going to be fighting, but it takes a little bit of time, and the extremists become smaller and smaller on each side. We need to take action on this. I'm doing my part. I'm trying to. What I can do is speak out. I can try and educate. And because of that, I ask that you support what I do. I want to say thank you to the one person in the last 2 hours to make a donation through the Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you so much to Rose. I thank you so much. And it is possible that someone's made a donation on Patreon or PayPal. I just don't have that up. Journalism is the way to go. Education, publicly educating people about the issue, getting past the nasty rhetoric and the fighting, the cat fights over all of the little issues, and getting to the core of what really matters. That's what I believe is the most important thing to do. It does take time, though. I've talked to some people recently who have been activists for a while, and even people who have been at this a long time, like I have this sense of just emotional exhaustion. Because with everything that's being done, I'm sure some of you out there look and you're like, how can people, so many people, not see the simplicity of the issue? It's not complex. You can't subjugate people. You can't relegate the Palestinian people into animals and treat them like animals. If there was no occupation, Hamas would not have the power that it does. Hamas would be back doing what Hamas originally did, which is providing religious education, social support to the poor, I'm no fan of Hamas. I've never been a fan of Hamas. Hamas is who I spoke out so just constantly against Hamas back during the second Intifada. Tons of writing. I'm no fan of Hamas, but I understand the conflict enough to know that the militancy of Hamas didn't come from nowhere. It came in response to something. What is that something? Oppression. Severe, unrelenting oppression, land theft, apartheid, colonialism. When people are desperate, they turn to desperate means. So, is this going to be solved this year? Of course not. Or next year. It is going to take years to resolve this because the gears of time move very slowly. But things are trending in the right direction. We can't convince the boomers, not many of them, maybe some of them. We can help them to see the light. But the real change that's going to happen is going to come because the rising generation, they are so different from their parents and grandparents when it comes to Israel. And I'm talking about Jews. The millennial and Gen Z Jews, they have a very, very different take on what's going on over there. Aliyah to Israel from American Jews, it's down 66% from what it was a decade ago. Israel used to really push, they still push for American Jews to move to Israel. They want the immigration because they see their demographic trend. Their birth rate is abysmal. The population is going to shrink. If it weren't for the immigration, they'd be in big trouble. But they're not moving in the same numbers, down 2/3 from 10 years ago. The attitudes are very, very different. As these Gen Z kids start moving up and replacing the old guard in the United States government, in British government, and governments around the world, as they move up, policies are going to change. You're not going to sway Biden. He's old. He's from the old way, the old ways. You vote Trump into power over this. You think Biden's bad? Biden's biggest problem is that he's apathetic and doesn't do anything. He's not openly pushing for apartheid. He's not openly pushing for settlement building. He is openly pushing for more money for Israel. But you put Trump back in? Put Nikki Haley in? The dream team for Israel would be a Trump-Haley ticket. It's a sad thing. There are no good politicians right now. RFK Jr., diehard Zionist, totally abandoned his principles. Biden, no hope for him. Even progressives or people who used to say they were progressives, like Tulsi Gabbard, totally on board with the Zionists. It's going to take this rising generation and things will change. So over the course of the next 20 years, as the Gen Zs move into positions of political power, and more, Israel knows it. They see the writing on the wall. They know that attitudes are taking there's a seismic shift going on. And it has them rattled, which was one of the reasons that Netanyahu and his people are pushing so hard to do what they can as quick as they can, because they know that they have limited time. So we need to keep pushing. We can accelerate the process. That's what I'm trying to do. So my point is, you have to look at this issue. You have to decry the atrocities that Israel is committing in the present day, but we have to look long term and focus on the core issues of apartheid and the military occupation and resolve those things and keep pushing that. Keep it in the face of the pro-Israel people and be unrelenting. We're going to win, but it's going to get darker before we get there. I anticipate even worse atrocities than what we've seen recently. Remember, I've been reporting on this for years. 2008, 1,400 to 1,800 Palestinian civilians killed. 2014, 2,400, thousands in between. Now 2023, over 14,000. It's going to get bad because they're desperate. But we're making a lot of changes. Jill F in the in the chat says, "I'm a boomer, 70 years old, been following you for a few years." Jake, did you say there are 5.3 million Israelis, 5.8 million Palestinians? There are, let me see if I can break it down. You've got approximately 7 million Jews, Jewish Israelis. And then you've got roughly 7.3 million Palestinians. And the way that breaks down is, what was it, close to 2 million Palestinian or Arab Israeli citizens. You get about 350,000 Arab Israelis who have permanent resident status. They're not full citizens in East Jerusalem. You got about 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, 2.2 to 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. So when you add it up, and these are rough numbers because these are census figures from the last couple of years, 2021 to what I've seen, most recent figures. So you're looking at approximately total 7 million Jews and 7.3 million Palestinians. But it's fair to say, 7 and 7, approximately 14 million. Yeah. Patrick in the chat says Israel population, current population is 9,230,833, based on Worldometer elaboration of the latest UN data. And that 9.2 million includes the Arabs as well, who are citizens. My opinion is that there's no way around it. Jews are going to have to learn to live with the Palestinians. You can't drive the Jews out. You can't drive the Palestinians out. They're trying, but it's not going to happen. You can drive some of them out through ethnic cleansing, but you're not going to move 7 million Jews or 7 million Palestinians out. It's not going to happen. It's not realistic. So you have to deal with the reality of the situation. You cannot have a political system that favors Jews and suppresses the rights of the Palestinians. It doesn't work. Israel does not want to give the Palestinians rights. They're certainly not going to agree to a two-state solution, and they don't want to agree to a one-state solution, because a one-state solution means you can't have a Jewish-only state or a Jewish supremacist state. What has to happen is that they must be convinced through international pressure, through boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. Israel must be taught the lesson that South Africa was taught. That's what happened to South African apartheid. BDS. BDS is what defeated apartheid in South Africa. You've got the whites in power. Blacks don't get the same rights. So you have BDS. Individuals can boycott. The B means boycott. Individual people like me and you, we can boycott Israeli products, Israeli services. My website, currently I don't have Blackstone Intel up. I used to. Years ago, I had set up Blackstone Intel. The best service out there that I saw was Wix. And so I set up my website with Wix. Only later did I learn that Wix is an Israeli company. So I got rid of it. I wanted to get a SodaStream machine for my office here a handful of years ago. I'm not going to support an Israeli company, so I got a knockoff brand. I went to get a printer. I think it was a Hewlett-Packard that has does a lot of business with Israeli, has a lot of connection to Israeli settlements. So I bought a Canon printer. We can choose to boycott products, services. The D means divestment. Divestment is something that is the primarily the more wealthy class that invests big time. Now, even small time people, we can choose. If you have a 401k, you can look and see what are my investments in. If you have stocks, bonds, are these Israeli companies? Divest. But mostly the D, the divestment, is corporations refusing to do business with Israel. Ben and Jerry's did a good job taking a stand against Israel. And for a little while, it didn't last very long, but Airbnb, they had a bunch of they came under pressure from the BDS movement because they were listing homes for rent on their website in Israeli settlements. Israeli settlements are illegal. They're Jewish settlements set up against international law on stolen territory. So Airbnb stopped listing for a while. They got a lot of backlash and they resumed. But anyway, divestment. And then sanctions. So corporations can divest. Sanctioning is something done at the national level. Countries can sanction. Governments can issue sanctions against Israel for inappropriate behavior. So basically, BDS is a form of economic warfare. It is a peaceful means of trying to bring about change. Now, you've got a big debate even among pro-Palestinians about the effectiveness of BDS. Part of the problem is that, at least from the opinion of Norman Finkelstein, he used to support BDS, and then he started criticizing it because BDS changed from being just a movement to being kind of an organization, and he didn't like the organization or something like that. But in general, boycotting Israel is something that can help. And that is why Israel bought up our politicians, not only in the federal government, but at the state level. I think it's 26 states in America have state laws where it is against the law to boycott Israel. Can you believe that? I'm a frickin' American citizen. I will boycott whatever the hell I want to. If I own a business and I don't want my business to do business with Israel, you're going to tell me that I don't have the right as an American to choose who I want to associate with and spend money with, and yet 26 states against the law. Israel really poured, the Israeli lobby, led by AIPAC, and anyway, they put so much effort into defeating BDS. Yes, Jill points out Musk went to grovel at Netanyahu's feet after being called out. The high and mighty Elon Musk. If you are one of the richest men in the world and you flaunt your power and I'm so independent, but you get brought to heel like that, and you are made to humiliate yourself and grovel at the feet of a war criminal. Funny thing is, Elon Musk, Twitter, X, one of the ministers over there, was it Ben-Gvir? May have been Ben-Gvir. Anyway, one of the Israeli ministers had his government Twitter account suspended in the last month for advocating dropping nuclear bombs on Gaza to annihilate the people. So Twitter, kind of violates rules to call for genocide. So Twitter suspended his account. I saw on Twitter video of Elon Musk shaking the hand and posing for a smiley photo op with that very minister. They got him. They got Elon Musk wrapped around their finger. RFK Jr. A lot of people used to like RFK Jr. because he used to take a stand against Israel in favor of Palestinian rights. They got him. And now there is no end to the amount of Israeli propaganda that he's out there pushing. And these people, you can tell they're not happy about it. Elon Musk, did he look like he was enjoying himself? He knew that he was going to get trashed on X, and he did. I followed it closely. He posted an interview. Benjamin Netanyahu did a Twitter Space interview with Elon Musk, and he made Musk grovel. It was sickening. Musk was talking about how, oh yeah, there's such a huge difference between Israel and the Palestinians because Hamas, they just relished, they love killing Jews. They loved it. They were so joyful. But I know that Israel is doing everything in its power to avoid any civilian casualties in Gaza. What? Elon Musk is not an idiot. I know that guy has seen videos that are just everywhere on Twitter of the there's nobody truly believes that Israel is trying to avoid civilian casualties. But boy, was he was saying it. Yeah, Freedom Fox. Interesting timing. Isn't Musk South African? One of the things that Canary Mission went after me for, Canary Mission, you have not made it. You haven't hit stardom yet until Canary Mission has written an anonymous smear piece against you. They went after me years ago. But one of the things that they really criticized me for, said it was very anti-Semitic, was because I had brought up how the very, very provocative thing that the Trump administration did was every previous administration in U.S. history since the founding of Israel, no U.S. administration, Democrat or Republican, ever agreed that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Tel Aviv was the capital. The U.S. Embassy had always been in Tel Aviv. Trump administration said, because Netanyahu was in there, said, no. We're going to support whatever Bibi wants. And so you had Trump's daughter, who is Jewish, Trump's son-in-law, who is Jewish, both in the Trump administration. One after another, going over to make monumental changes in history that not only led to violence against the Palestinians and dramatically increased the conflict over there. You've got the Trump administration doing this because Trump's financial backers, the Adelsons, Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam, bankrolled Trump's 2016 campaign. They pushed him hard to do this. So you've got you've got all of these people in Donald Trump's cabinet. His Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, was a Rothschild banker who helped bail him out years ago, Jewish. Over and over, cabinet members who pushed him and supported him, and he did this, and it ramped up hostilities over there, led to a lot of bloodshed, led to the Great March that resulted in a whole lot of deaths of Palestinians. And I asked on Twitter, I said, forget that they're Jewish. We're a very diverse population here in the United States. How is it that one particular group is exerting so much influence over U.S. foreign policy? Would we not be very upset if, for example, 1% of the population, say, is Arab? What if we were doing something that was unjust, unfair, that a large portion, a grossly disproportionate portion of the Biden administration was, say, Saudi Arabian, and suddenly our administration here is doing things that are not in the interests of the American people, that only favor the Saudis and increases warfare with, say, the Yemeni people? Would we have a problem with that? Well, you're doggone right we would. I mean, this is America. You think, I remember after 9/11 and the build up to the Iraq War, there was so much Islamophobia. There still is, but back then, oh my gosh, you couldn't say anything without being called a Muslim lover or all kinds of epithets, towel head, all the stuff they used to call me, and others. What if we had Muslims exerting a grossly disproportionate influence over the US government? Would the American people be okay with that? Of course not. What if it was Chinese Americans that exerted a grossly disproportionate amount of control that turned into official US policy for a foreign government? Would the American people tolerate that? No. So my point was, we should treat Jews the same way we treat everyone else, with equality. You don't have people that make up 1% of the population exerting so much control over the political process and foreign policy that it favors one group over another against the good, the welfare of the American people. Man, was I hit hard being called an anti-Semite. That goes with the territory. One good thing for me is that I'm not beholden to any company. I don't answer to anyone else. I'm an entrepreneur. I own my own businesses. No one can fire me. But I'm one of the few lucky ones where I'm kind of immune to the Zionist attacks. Now it still hurts my reputation, the smearing and the attacks and everything. Look up my name on the internet and you find my name associated with anti-Semitism everywhere. But that's par for the course. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-fascist. I am anti-Zionist. I oppose what Israel does, not because they are Jewish. I oppose it because what they do is wrong. I'm also extremely critical of the government of Saudi Arabia. It's not because they're Arabs. I am not Islamophobic because I criticize Mohammed bin Salman. No one accuses me of being Islamophobic. I'm critical of Chinese attacks on the Uyghurs and their oppression of the Muslim Uyghurs. Nobody accuses me of being anti-Chinese. But if you criticize Israel, you got to be prepared for it because they'll hit you. This is why for years I have been very glad to be involved in associations that are Jewish majorities. Jewish Voice for Peace is one organization that I belong to. I pay my dues. I support them. I don't support JVP and everything that they do. There's a lot of social stuff that I don't support. But on the issue of Palestinian rights, I do support them. And I work with them. I'm not against Jews. I'm against cruelty to the Palestinian people. I really look forward to the day when Jews and Palestinians can live in peace over there. And I'm trying to work toward that, along with so many other people, including many of you out there. Peace isn't possible with the apartheid regime that is over there now, and the apartheid system, or the military occupation. Those things have to end. Only when those things end will we have peace. Zara L says, have I heard of the Duran? I have. You can reach out to me at jake@blackstoneintel.com would be the best way. to reach me. You can also, if you're on Twitter, I don't know if I've got direct messages set up on my at Morphonios account, but at blackstoneintel, you can direct message me there as well. Let me throw this out there. I'm going to start to wrap up here in just a second. I am going to start reaching out to other people to interview. Whose perspectives would you like to hear? Like what people out there would you like me to contact and see if I can set up interviews with over the coming weeks? Type it in the chat, or if you're not watching this on live stream, type it in the comments. If you happen to know somebody that you can connect me with as a go-between, great. If you know somebody's contact information, an email address or something, and you want to recommend, then send that to me, and I'll look. So in the chat there, we've got Norman Finkelstein, Dr. Shiva, Scott Ritter, Ryan Dawson, Rabbi Shapiro. So just put it in the chat there, and I'll look at it and see, and I'll start reaching out to some people. I'd like to do some interviews. Couple other donations here. I want to say thank you to Real Naughty Alba, and also someone, an anonymous donation there. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate that you did that. And I'll send you a little message on the website there, a little thank you message as well. All right. Anything before I get going here? Does anyone have maybe one or two quick questions that I can answer, and then I'll wrap it up? I think I've got about a 10-second delay between my stream and what I see in the chat. So let's give it a second here. I'll answer one or two quick questions. And while I'm doing that, I'll just read out some of the other names that I'm seeing. Let's see. Norman Finkelstein. I'd like to interview Noam Chomsky. I think that'd be fun. Rick Wiles, Gabor Mate, or Gabor Mate, Kim Iverson, Adam King, Abby Martin, John Bolton. Challenge Ben Shapiro to a debate. I'd debate him in a heartbeat, but here's the thing: whether it's Ben Shapiro or anyone who I think I'd know more about the history of the Palestinian conflict than he does, as far as the details. But even if I were to debate somebody who knows vastly more, and I was thinking about this with the current Israeli government spokesman. I think it's Elon Levy is his name. He's got a great command of facts, but I don't feel like I would have any trouble winning in a debate, because it's not about the minutia. It's about the basic principle. A person can argue all of these little details, all of the, maybe they know how, the more names and more dates and more little factoids about a particular subject, but if the basic part of your argument is not supportable, like, you can't really argue in favor of apartheid and win. You can't argue in favor of ongoing suppression of an ongoing system that generates so much misery for so many people. That's how you win debates, is by on this subject, is the big picture. I can convey that. So when it comes to Ben Shapiro, here's the thing. I would agree with Ben on the points where there should be agreement. If he says, "Oh, what was done on October 7th to the Israeli citizens is terrible," yeah, I agree. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I'm going to make Ben talk about uh, what precipitated it. The context does matter. And I'm not some ignorant 18-year-old freshman in college trying to peddle whatever transgender stuff or whatever he's got his little talking points that he always uses that makes him look smart. He's not an intelligent person when it comes to the big issues. He'll talk and try and run rings. It's kind of like I was talking in the beginning of the show 2.5 hours ago about how my wife and I can, it's kind of unfair. She can be right about whatever the issue is, but I can still win the argument because I'm a better debater. Ben Shapiro can be more articulate than most of the people that he talks to, but that doesn't make him right. The morality of the issue is rarely on Shapiro's side. Cornell West, Max Blumenthal. I would enjoy talking with Max. Marianne Williamson, Jimmy Dore, Dr. Paul Zietz, Dan Cohen, Ryan Christian, Chris Hedges. A couple of these names I'm not familiar with. I'd have to look it up. And Chomsky, I've been reading Chomsky for 20 years. Actually, I started listening. I learned about Chomsky myself back around 1995, 96. I was listening to lectures by not Max Skousen, Cleon Skousen, who had been in the FBI, had been a professor also for a while, and knew Chomsky. And they had debates. But anyway, I had never heard of Chomsky until I heard these lectures. And so I decided to go and look up Chomsky. And I'm like, I don't agree with most of this guy's stuff. And I don't. A lot of what Chomsky says, I don't agree with. But he is a brilliant person who knows a lot. I mean, he knows a lot. And he's very old now. But he's evolved. He's evolved for good and for not so good on different issues. But when it comes to the issue of Israel-Palestine, I do appreciate his perspective. Dr. Ron Paul. I wish I had my picture of me and Ron here. I'd show you. I actually haven't talked with Ron Paul in several years now. But I would like to talk with him. Judge Napolitano. I couldn't have pork bacon keeps talking about Dr. Shiva. I only learned about Dr. Shiva just recently. Holy cow. That guy's language. I mean, sure, interesting in some ways, but not my cup of tea. Susan Sarandon, Wesley Clark. Lots of good feedback here. I appreciate it. Oh, Ilan Pape, I would love to interview him. I've got Actually, right here on my desk, I've got one of his books. Very intelligent guy. I just finished kind of a small book. It's not so much a book as it is a series of interviews, him and Noam Chomsky. Oh, okay. I'll have to check out Rabbi Shapiro. Senator Hawley. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up here. I just wanted to say one more time, thank you to you guys for your support, your interest in these topics, and especially even if I don't see it, for what you do in your own social media accounts to promote justice, peace, a better world. Takes a lot of people speaking out. We've got to be tenacious. Um, I am going to be putting out this week I've got some supplies. I've made a series of information packs that come about the Palestinian issue that have different products in it, like a lapel pin, Palestinian flag lapel pin, a bracelet, a Free Palestine bracelet, stickers, booklets about the occupation, and I'm going to include some of my own reports that I've written in it, and I'm going to offer it as a pack to people that want to contribute and learn more. And so I'll be putting that up this week. And anyway, thank you. Darth Pronator says 10 out of 10 show. Great job. Thank you, brother Nathaniel. You got to understand, some people who have been kicked off of YouTube, it is a violation of YouTube's rules for someone who's still on YouTube to interview someone who has been kicked off YouTube. So some of these people that you guys are mentioning, I would end up having to do it as like a Rumble only or something private, something that's not on YouTube. A few of these, because it violates their guidelines. But anyway, all right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to wrap it up. I appreciate your support. Take care, and I will talk with you again very, very soon. Thanks so much to those of you who helped out, like Political Foolishness in the moderation out there. Thank you, guys.